Hi everyone, I decided to make an online sort of chalkboard video talking about egoism in the modern world, capitalism being an economic expression of egoism. We're going to look at how modern economies work in a very basic sense, of course. The role of workers, that's us in these economies. And then we're going to look at comparisons of capitalism and socialism, both in their ideal forms, but also in the ways that they are lived out today in the world. So we're going to begin with a very typical scene. You find this hundreds of times a day, millions of times a year. In fact, around the country, someone decides to open up a business. So here we have a woman who's going to open up a coffee shop. We have several coffee shops in Waterloo, of course, and the idea is to offer a nice place for people to sit down and enjoy company, have some nice products to enjoy. And the idea, right, is that you will attract people to come in and spend money on your products, and this will enable you to run a business and to survive and pay for your rent and all of that. So there we have some pastries and some coffee, and we've got a small business started. And every business, no matter what kind of business it is, basically has to contend with revenues. That's the income versus expenses. And your profit, of course, is when your revenues exceed your expenses. So in this case, revenues are people choosing to buy your products. Perhaps you're filling a need. Maybe you're even creating a new market. You hope to offer a good value, perhaps at low prices, good quality. You all understand the basics here. So here we have the beginning of how capitalism is going to function. We have a second coffee shop opening up, and he's decided to offer slightly different products than the first coffee shop. And he has the same issues, right? Revenues versus expenses. And there's only two ways to increase your profits. You can increase revenues with more people coming in, or you can reduce your expenses. And now we can begin to look at the genius behind the idea of capitalism. We'll call it alchemy or magic. Alchemy is an ancient idea that you can transform one substance into another kind of substance. And the alchemy we're talking about here is transforming greed, ambition, pride, all of these traditional sins, right? If you go to church, no one preaches that you should be greedy or prideful, but capitalism teaches exactly that. Capitalism says all these things seem bad until you see what they bring to the world. Each of the people here is competing and saying, I will outcompete you, I will win, I will do better than you and make more money than you. And this is the alchemy of capitalism. There's capitalism, the magnificent, the magician, and he takes what we've considered to be ethical garbage, right, the love of money and greed, and he magically transforms it into prosperity for the community. How does this work? How does capitalism take something that we have always considered to be bad and wrong, and how does it transform this again and again and again on a daily basis into something that we can see is good? And it is through competition. So now we have these two coffee shops competing, and each of them is saying, I can beat you by lowering my prices to get more customers, or by getting better prices on my supplies, or by doing the maintenance myself. Each decision individually is fueled by greed or ambition or love of money, but the amazing thing is that these decisions result in something amazing. You and I get better coffee at lower prices, right? The general public now gets a $2 cup of coffee that's much, much better than it was 10 years ago because of the competition. Both sides have found ways to be more efficient, to make profits, but in their greed and ambition to make profits, we all benefit. I want you to stop and think about that and how that works, right? We get lower prices and better quality items because they are trying to make more money. They're not concerned about our welfare. They're not a charity, right? They're not doing it for our benefit. They're providing us with things so that they can make as much money as possible. But their greed and ambition magically creates a better situation for the rest of us who are going to buy their products. Now, there's a second level of capitalism. The first we've looked at, coffee shop versus coffee shop, car dealer versus car dealer. But in a broader sense, capitalism has only begun through the picture that we've painted so far. And this is when you want to expand your business, maybe not just have 2 or 3 coffee shops, but perhaps you want to go across the state or across the nation. Of course, you can get business loans. A bank will give you business loans, but there are limits to how much money they're going to give you. If you're Starbucks, back in 1978, and you really are ambitious and you want to make lots of money by going national, you're going to need something more than a bank loan. You're going to need someone called an investor, and that's someone who has lots and lots and lots of money already. And you offer them percentages of ownership in your company. They're called stocks. And you try to convince them that if they give you the money to expand your business will make lots and lots and lots of money, and their 5% or 10% or 20% will be worth lots and lots more for them in the future. So you have to understand this basic fact that for an investor, they don't care about the actual products that you're making. They're not interested in the details of the specific business. They look at all the things that we see. That could be hardware, it could be telescopes, it could be real estate, it could be romantic apps, it could be pharmaceuticals, it could be the art world. It doesn't matter, because their vision is focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is money. They are investing their money to make more money. So every company that they might invest in represents to them a potential for more money, no matter what kind of company it is. Now, there's been something that has happened over the past 30 years or so that I know you all have experienced, either directly or indirectly, and it's a massive change, and it's called globalization. And globalization is the movement of jobs from wealthy countries, including the United States, of course, to very poor countries. And the people in those poor countries work for American companies producing their products. And the reason that the jobs are sent overseas is because the people in those countries make a tiny, tiny fraction of the salaries and the wages that we would make here if we made them in the United States. So this is one way that companies minimize their costs, right? And so if you're an investor, if you're looking at different companies, if the wages are too high, you're going to say, I don't want to invest in that company. I'm going to sell that stock. If a union is forming, giving workers more rights, you might say, you know what? That's going to cut into our costs. I don't want to invest in that company. On the other hand, if you see that the wages are low, you will invest because that means more profit for you. So every company competing for investors has to demonstrate to the investors one thing: profitability. And the way they do that is by outsourcing the jobs to people who get paid very, very little to do those jobs. So if we get now to the question of the status of workers in today's system, we can say that there are benefits to the system and there are risks and difficulties in the system. It's true that in capitalism we are free to start our own businesses. It also means we are free to compete and to make any kind of products that we want without restriction. So as we've seen, competition transforms individual greed and ambition into valuable products for the community. We usually call this innovation, the efficiency of the marketplace. But competition also forces us to care about profits above everything else, because if you can't make profits, you will lose the competition. You'll have to close your business. So this means that from the perspective of the company, workers are valuable only insofar as they can produce profits above the competition. This is, a bit of a problem now, because the people who are doing the work for the company are seen potentially as a problem, right? As something that costs too much, is too expensive, for example, right? And if there are other more efficient ways of getting that work done, then the workers will be let go, or their wages will be cut, etc. So cutting wages and benefits, etc., brings a competitive advantage, which is the fuel of capitalism. People are expensive, the fewer the better. And investors, not really the owners of the company, but the investors determine the success or failure of companies, because if they can find another company that makes anything, it doesn't have to be another coffee company. They can find another company that makes anything more efficiently and more profitably. They will sell the stock in your company, the coffee shop, and they will buy stock in these other companies. So as you can see, no matter how ethical or moral an owner wants to be, you can't really escape the race for cheap labor, lower benefits, etc., because every company that goes public is competing for the same investors. So again, the magic of capitalism is that we get cheaper things to buy, but it also means that we, the workers, get paid less and less. The profits go to the owners of the companies and ultimately to the investors, but the workers who work harder and harder can be replaced. If a machine, a robot, or an algorithm can do better, the worker will be replaced. So now I want to talk about some comparisons between capitalism and socialism. We can look at the classical definition. So if you read a textbook, or if you look historically at what these ideas represent, you can say that capitalism begins with a fundamental right of private property. Every person has a right to what they possess, and no one else has a right to take it from them. Open markets, as we've said, buying and selling of anything is the fuel of capitalism, and it works through competition. In classical capitalism, there are very few rules. The government does not, quote unquote, interfere with economic activity. Capitalism is the philosophy of wealth. Capital is just another word for wealth. So you could call it wealthism. And finally, the decisions in capitalism are decentralized. You have every day millions and millions of little decisions made by business owners, CEOs, Wall Street traders, etc. And all of these are what are called decentralized. No one is controlling or planning these decisions. Classically, in socialism, instead of private property, you have an emphasis on shared property. Instead of open markets, you have economic planning. So you have a group of people who study the economy, study the society, and then put together a plan for what needs to be produced to provide the goods and services for the society. Instead of competition, you have cooperation. Instead of a few rules, you have many rules. It's basically a system where everyone gets on board and plays by the same rules to help the society. Instead of wealth being the goal, community, what's good for the community is the goal. And instead of decentralized, lots and lots of small decisions made by individuals, you have decisions made by, say, a central committee, something like that. Now, that's not how it works out in the real world. In actual practices today, we'll see that most societies are a mix of capitalism and socialism. So, for example, in this country, we have private property. We have regulated markets, so markets that are somewhat open, but there's still a lot of environmental and other kinds of rules. There's competition, absolutely. But in addition to those three classical elements of capitalism, we subsidize many, many, many industries, some lightly and some very heavily, which is to say that the government passes laws that give tax breaks or other benefits to specific industries. So that introduces a bit of socialism into the mix. Today we also have multinational corporations, which was really not imagined at the beginning of capitalism. We usually thought of corporations as, taking being based in a single country and working out of that country, but now we have corporations that are massive and have bases in dozens and dozens of different countries. And then also we have social programs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which would not normally fit into a classical view. So socialist countries today, maybe you could look at a country like China, have private property rights. So in China, you have a right to private property. That's unexpected in a socialist country. You also have markets. Now, they're very regulated, but they are markets, and they invite competition. So those are three somewhat capitalist elements in a country like China, but they also have very high taxes in some ways, which capitalism would not have. They have lots of social programs, just to say programs to help people with unemployment and healthcare and things like that. And they have central planning in some areas. That's where the government says, we need to have an energy policy, and we're going to put lots of money into an energy policy so that corporations will invest in, say, green technology. So that would be kind of socialist way of planning parts of the economy as opposed to just open, free capitalism. And we can look at other ways in which the actual practice today is mixed. So as I said, you have private property and competition, open markets. These are all capitalist. But most countries also have taxes on wealth, some much more than others, social programs like unemployment insurance and Social Security. So if we look at two countries today, we can see, just as a comparison, compare the USA with something like Germany. The USA has some very strong capitalist elements, you can see, but it also has some socialist elements. So we have public schools. We have roads and infrastructure paid for by the government. We have public parks and national and state parks. Those are socialist property. Those are shared and owned by all of us. We have Medicare, which takes taxes from everyone and uses it to pay for health care for those who need it. We have Social Security, which again takes taxes so that people will have benefits and can survive in retirement. We have unemployment benefits. As I mentioned before, we have industry subsidies, and an example of that would be crop insurance. Here in Iowa, you have farmers who buy insurance against having a bad yield, but the government puts in billions and billions of dollars to make that insurance affordable. So this would be more of a socialist plan than a capitalist one. Then you take something like Germany. They have some very basic capitalist principles of private property, competition, decentralized decisions, but they go a lot farther in their socialist elements than we do in the US. For example, we have free education up through the 12th grade. They have free education all the way through college and graduate school. They provide roads and infrastructure. They have universal health care. Healthcare in the United States is mixed. For most of us, it's private. For some, on Medicare and Medicaid, it's socialist, public. In Germany, it's all public. No one pays for healthcare in Germany. You pay through taxes. Unemployment benefits, same as here, or maybe more generous than the US. And Germany has some elements like China, where the government will put lots and lots of money into certain things that it thinks are good for the society as a whole. And one result of that is higher taxes to pay for those social programs. So I want to leave you with some ethical questions that our society, I think, is struggling with and that we should be thinking about as well. Should we encourage greed and ambition as good things? Should we really take up the egoist chant and say, Jesus, you're wrong. Buddha, you're wrong. Muhammad, you're wrong. Greed and ambition, the love of money are not bad things. In fact, they're good things, and the more we participate in them, the more prosperous we will be. Second, should the benefits of capitalism, cheaper goods that we can buy, should these benefits outweigh the treatment of workers, which is ultimately we're expendable if something cheaper comes along and makes more profit for businesses, we are expendable. Is that how we should set up our society? Third, if capitalism is our best economic system, what role should society have in protecting workers? So should we have unemployment insurance? Should we pay for everyone's health care? Should we have job training? All of those things would be paid in a socialist way. They would be paid by taxes that we all pay into so that everyone is protected. Should we have more of those protections or fewer of those protections would be a big question for our society. And if mixed systems are better than pure systems, pure capitalism or pure socialism, then what kind of mix should we try to achieve? How should we look at our economy? What kind of laws should we have? What kind of policies should we have? What kind of goals should we have? And where do human beings, the workers, 90% of us workers in this system, where should we be located in this system, and what role should we play? So I hope that you have understood some of this. I hope it's helped you understand some of the things that happen in your life,
right? The love of